fermentation starters are very simple to make, and you can use them in a variety of recipes such as breads and my personal favorite, all natural sodas or drinks. And you need very few ingredients. And I have here a mason jar that's been washed and sterilized. I have some fresh pineapple, organic cane sugar, and of course we need some water, and my water of choice is distilled water. You can use purified water. Stay away from the city tap water. It has too many additives and chemicals that slows down the fermentation process. Let me show you very quickly just how quick and easy it is to make this fermentation starter using some really basic ingredients like I said. And we're gonna add the sugar into our jar and our water. This process takes a few days, usually anywhere between 2 to 3 days, sometimes more, depending on the internal temperature of your home. That's very important for any type of fermentation project that you're working with. Where you keep your ferments is very important. When the sugar is dissolved, we can add the pineapple. You can make the fermentation starters using any kind of fruit. Depending on how tart or sweet your fruit is, you may have to adjust the sugar as you go. Basically, just have to titrate it and try different methods until you come up with a method that works for you. As always, we like to wipe it clean. And just like when we did the vinegars and the wine, the fermentation starters require to be covered, and that's just basically to keep the bugs and the dust away. So I'll be using some cheesecloth to cover it. Place it over the top just like that. And grab one of my handy dandy rubber bands and secure the cloth. And there you have it. It's done. In the next few days, it's gonna begin bubbling. When we come back tomorrow, we're gonna be adding a little bit more sugar and a little bit more water until we're done with the process. But before we move on to that, just like when we do the vinegars and the wine, we always want to label it and date it so we can track them and monitor the progress of our projects. That's very important, especially if you have multiple fermentations going at the same time. Labeling them is going to make it a lot easier for you. Okay? And we're done, and I'll see you back tomorrow for the next step. Hello you guys, welcome back. Currently on day 2 of our pineapple fermentation starter, and we're ready for the next step. For this next step, we're simply going to add more sugar and water, as I mentioned before. We don't have significant changes on our fermentation starter because after all, it's only been 24 hours. How quickly it ferments is going to depend on the environment where we keep a fermentation starter. Of course, the internal temperature of your home is a very big factor. So what we're going to do, like I said, we're getting ready to add more sugar and water. This time we're going to add an additional tablespoon of our organic cane sugar and more distilled water. Just like I've done before, we agitate it to dissolve the sugar. You want to make sure your sugar is perfectly dissolved. And as you agitate it, you might see some bubbles. If you're lucky and you have the perfect temperature inside your home, this mixture may begin to ferment within 2 to 3 days. Again, we want to secure it by placing a piece of a rag or cheesecloth over the top to keep the dust and the bugs away. We're done with day 2, and we'll be back tomorrow for the next edition of Sugar and Water. Okay, we're back with the next edition of the water and sugar. The past 3 days, we've been adding water and sugar to promote a good fermentation for our starter. Fermentation is a flexible art, and there are several methods and techniques for this practice. If you're experimenting with ferments for the first time, my advice is that you stick to the most basic fundamental aspects of fermentation. For example, you can prepare this fermentation starter in parts, gradually adding water and sugar during the course of 3 to 5 days, or you can mix the sugar and the water all at once in the same day to make a fermentation starter that can be used later on for baked breads, or even to make your own natural sodas or drinks like this one that we have here. This is actually my preferred method because I have more interaction with the starter, and also I can monitor the activity happening more closely, whichever method you decide to use will be just fine. Every ferment requires a basic formula, and on the screen I've provided a table with the most basic and common formula that I use. Once you start getting a little bit more practice, you can adjust the process anywhere you like. The formula requires the use of water, preferably distilled water, which is what I normally use. In addition to the water, it calls for a source of culture. For example, it can be kaffir water, and I have one right here. Later on a different video, we can talk a little bit about what kaffir water is and also the benefits of using kaffir water. But you can use that as a source of a culture, for example, and even the fruit or flowers that you're using. We need a source of sugar, and almost all the time I use organic cane sugar, of course, because it's not processed. I've never made a culture using white sugar. The more we process the sugar, the more beneficial properties and nutritional value we lose from it. Honestly, the more processed the sugar, it slows down the fermentation process, and I'm not really sure how successful you will be at making a culture using white sugar because I've never really used it. If you don't have cane sugar, you could use honey. The honey should be raw, again, because we don't want to use a sugar source that has been overly processed. And of course, if you're using fresh fruit for your fermentation starter, the sugar nectar from the fruit itself can serve as the sugar source for your starter. Finally, we need a flavoring. This can also be the fruit, the flowers, or the herbs that you're using to make your initial fermentation starter. We call it a fermentation starter because after the initial ferment, we can create a variety of fermentations using this starter. One of the reasons why I like this particular project a lot, it gives you the ability to create a number of all natural sodas. You can use fermentation starters to make bread, and there is a lot of options, and of course a lot of good health benefits too. Drinking these types of fermentation starters is amazing for your gut. As we share more of these videos, we can talk a little bit more about the benefits of these types of all natural drinks. With every addition of sugar, the microorganisms found mainly in the environment, as well as the fruits that we use, feed from their nectar or their sugars, and fermentation occurs by eliminating the sweetness or the sugars from the fruit, converting it into an acid with a minimum alcohol level. And this always happens with ferments using sugar. Okay, now that I have explained the process in more detail, let me bring you a little closer so that you can see everything that has been happening for the past 2 days in the jar. And we still have to add more water and sugar, but check it out. I'm going to shake it just a little bit so you can see just by simply shaking the jar what happens. Look at all those bubbles and the foam that forms at the top. That, my friends, means that our fermentation is very active and we're doing a fantastic job with the process. So I'm going to give it a quick stir again. In fact, I'm going to get my wooden stick so that we can do that. Show you what that looks like. And as we stir the jar, look at all those bubbles and the foam that forms over the top. This is a very healthy fermentation starter, and it's looking very good, and I'm very excited because I really can't wait to try it. Pineapple is probably one of my favorite fruits. This is actually one that I make a lot. Now that you've seen the progress of our fermentation starter, we can go ahead and add the sugar and the water for today. You can do this in 3 to 5 days depending on the internal temperature of your home. I always talk about the environment and the internal temperature in your home because that's probably one of the most important factors when we make ferments, and even when we bake bread. It's probably one of the most important factors in the kitchen, I would say. So now that you've seen just how active our ferment is, add the sugar and the water. Now I'm giving you guys the formula that I use and the recipe that I use, and again, as you experiment with different types of fermentation starters and these kinds of drinks, you can adjust the recipe any way you want. Okay, and now we can add the water. And we're gonna add enough water to bring it all the way to the shoulder of the jar, about that much. You always want to leave a little room, about 1 inch headspace, just in case it becomes very active. You don't want it to bubble over the jar. We are going to cover it and keep it in a warm area in your kitchen, away from direct sunlight, for 3 to 5 days covered. You can taste the drink every day and monitor the sugar level as you taste it. You should also notice bubbles forming as it ferments. Remember that the bacteria and the microorganisms, or the yeast in our culture source, feeds off the sugar, converting it into acid with a minimum alcohol level. We'll be back in 3 to 5 days, depending on how active my fermentation starter becomes, to show you what it looks like, and most importantly, we're gonna try it. After 3 to 5 days, the fermentation starter or soda is ready to enjoy cold or room temperature. You can drink the soda and the fruit if you want, or you can strain it and store it in an airtight bottle like this one. Also, you can strain it and make a second fermentation. The second fermentation takes about a day or two, depending on how we keep the ferment and also how much bubbles you like on your drink. And let me show you very quickly. See, when we shake it, all the bubbles that form on the top. And I want you to see what it looks like. If you don't finish the drink all in one day, it's recommended that you open and close the lids daily to let some of the gases escape. Our natural soda is ready. Looks lovely. Look at that color. It's absolutely beautiful and delicious too. Remember, these fermentation starters are not only delicious, but they're also a natural probiotic, very good for your gut health. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Leave your comments down below. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Activate the notification bell to be notified when I upload more simple and delicious video recipes like this one. And until next time, I'm Evita, cooking at the rhythm of my heart. Buen provecho y hasta la próxima.